Well, hello there, Zach and
Oh,
Tracy, coming at you from, well, Tracy's coming at it from literally her kitchen, and she's only steps away from the Strength Kitchen. And for those of you who are watching here on YouTube, I'm sporting the brand new Strength Kitchen logo. And this baseball tee is one of my favorites. So thank you, Tracy, for my sweet wardrobe today.
sure. Yep. And the Strength
my
Kitchen is my gym.
yes, for those who don't know, Tracy is cooking up the
My home
gains in
gym.
the Strength Kitchen. Yes.
My home gym.
And you know what? A lot of you who follow me probably already know Tracy. For those of you who follow Tracy, you probably already know me. So we thought that we would kind of skip over a lot of the formalities of, our history and all this stuff, which you can find a little bit of that, I think, in some of our, previous recordings. But we're going to broach a subject that it seems like not many folks are talking about, not many lifters are maybe even that comfortable talking about, both from the athlete side and the coaching side. I can say I'm a little bit nervous broaching this subject myself. But, Tracy, I will give credit where credit is due. She was like, this will be a valuable conversation. And I wholeheartedly agree. So we're going to talk about the nature of injuries and training with and through and around injuries. So with that being said, I'm not a doctor. Neither is Tracy Cook, as far as I know.
Nope.
So don't take anything you're going to hear as medical advice. This is all for entertainment purposes only. And for that matter, it's just a sharing of personal experience and stories. So I would like to, play a part in normalizing this conversation around pain and training through injury, because what we see, we're so, to kind of state the obvious, most of what we see from other people and from their training comes through Instagram and social media. And what is that? It's a great big old highlight reel, right? And even when people, so to speak, like share the struggles, a lot of times it just comes off, it still comes off a little bit more glamorous than what it really is. So Tracy is a competitive powerlifter. She has been for many years at this point. And she is, constantly pushing her edge and growing. And that pushes me as her coach as well. So all that to say, training with and around injury has been something that we have a lot of experience with. So I'm going to put the ball in your court, Tracy, and let's kind of take it back to your early years. Let's say seriously strength training. We were training in person in Charlotte, North Carolina, back in, must have been 2014, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And actually, it's actually funny. We also didn't talk about this. You actually delayed training with me in the first place because of a little injury. Maybe.
Had a
Yes, briefly tell us about that one.
So yes, as I had been training with kettlebells for about a year and a half when I moved from Washington, D.C. to Charlotte. And I knew I wanted to continue kettlebell training. And when I got to Charlotte, I was doing a Turkish get up and was working with someone else. And anyway, without going into the details on all that, I ended up with a broken middle finger, which was awesome because I had a splint and everywhere I went, that was sticking out. But I had, even through that, at that point, I was running, doing half marathons, not for fun, but, just so I still continued my training with that. But I had that for 6 weeks, I had a splint on. And so I messaged Zach and I found Zack. I was referred to Zack in Charlotte. And this was before we had ever even met. And I said that I wanted to come take his kettlebell class, and that I had a broken finger, and I was recovering from a broken finger. And I think that happened. The broken finger happened about 6 weeks or so before I came. And so it was, I was just kind of starting back to normal training when I got there. So yeah, that was actually probably my first.
So even from day one, even from our very first session,
I forgot about that.
Tracy had an injury. She had
Yeah.
had a broken middle finger.
Yeah.
So hey,
That is funny.
things happen.
Yep.
To put it bluntly, things happen, and you can have, again, you can take all the precautions. You can be a student of technique, and nobody's invincible. These things catch you, like, no matter who you are. So in any case, threw that one at you because it just came to my mind. I was like, oh yeah, Tracy had a broken middle finger when we started, or at
I
least you were
did.
recovering from a broken middle finger.
I was.
So I don't
Yeah.
think you were doing any hard bottoms up presses with that
No.
hands on day one.
Nope. And it was funny because it was everything. It was actually technique that I was doing with that. Everything was perfect, and the bell just slipped the wrong way and fractured my finger. So, but yeah, so that is kind of funny to think about that.
Yeah. So that was a little bit of a freak accident. And then
It was.
some months down the line, as we were in the thick of training, started getting a little elbow issues. So
Yep.
tell us how that happened. I would
Yeah.
assume, well,
It was.
I don't want to assume. So tell me
Yeah.
maybe what I was doing programming wise that could
Yeah.
have exacerbated that.
So, well, it was myself. I had never I When I moved from DC to Charlotte, I was training with a trainer twice a week and then doing a kettlebell class. So I had about 3 times a week. So that's what I was used to. I come to Charlotte and started working with Zack, and same thing. We kind of trained about 3 times a week in person, and I did kettlebell classes. But it was my first time being around other people too and training, but I really loved seeing the progress. And so I started getting a little bit kind of crazy. I was doing, I was determined that I was going to press the 24K kettlebell, which I can now do bottoms up. But at that point, I could not do a press with it. And I was only pressing the 16. So I started pressing the 20. And of course, I had a program that would, have me like 2 or 3 times a week pressing the 20K. And I thought, well, if 2 or 3 times a week I'm pressing it and I'm getting stronger, well, then if I did it every day, then clearly I would get stronger. So it was, maybe 3 or 4 sets, but I started doing it every day. And sure enough, I was able to press the 24, and I was so excited about that, and I continued. So that was a classic case of this was a classic case of overtraining. That's, on my own behalf. And because I was very excited to do this, and I had a kettlebell at home, so it was very easy. And it was a few months after that my elbows started bothering me. And I didn't really think a lot of it, except I had never had, other than, breaking my finger, fracturing my finger, I had never really had any kind of training injury. And so it really caught me off guard. And I was ultra sensitive. I was like, oh, I can't press anymore. And at the time, because I was so determined not, I was so excited about having my this 24K press, I thought, I'm going to lose this. If I stop doing this, I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. So I kept on pushing through. Not the smartest thing. Now I know better. But I did keep pushing through. I continued my training as normal, as if it was just going to go away on its own. Well, over the next month or so, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So I did go to an ortho doctor, and they looked at it, told me that I should probably go to physical therapy. So I did, and I went to physical therapy and they started helping me. And for months, and I stopped benching, but continued all my other training. But I was in, getting ready to do my first powerlifting meet. So this was about November, December of 2014. And I had planned to do my first meet in March. And at the same time, I was training for my Strong First Level 1 kettlebell certification. So I was doing both hand in hand, and I was devastated. Like I just thought, I'm not going to be able to do any of this. I can't bench right now. I can't do military presses. What am I going to do? I was very upset. And I would test it like every single day. I would do my physical therapy, go do my physical therapy, but then I would like take a kettlebell and there's pain. And so, I would test it just waiting for this pain to go away. And I was telling Zack when we were talking, a little while later, I'll kind of talk about how this has evolved over time. But now when I look back on that, I realize that it really wasn't that bad. It wasn't that painful. And there really is a lot that I could do to work around that. And at the time, of course, Zack was helping me and we were still doing, I never stopped training. We never stopped, I did stop doing the things that bothered it. But it really ended up being, I think it was because it was my very first training, my exposure to any kind of injury, overtraining injury. It was tendonitis, it was golfer's elbow. And it really wasn't bad, but I was wanting it to be completely like feel no pain at all, feel nothing. It would bother me when I would go on a long drive somewhere and then my elbow would bother me. So sometimes, not even training. And again, it was just because I was ultra sensitive to it. So that was kind of my very first time of running into anything that felt kind of iffy. And that healed up, got better. I benched. I did my powerlifting meet with no issue. I did my certification with no issue. I just felt like at that time I wouldn't say I was dramatic about it, because to me at that time it was the worst thing. I was very upset because I wasn't used to feeling any kind of discomfort or anything that was out of the ordinary. So it was my first exposure to that.
Yeah. There's a saying that the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So
Yeah.
it's all relative. You can only reference your own experience there. And sometimes there's either like an overt expectation or maybe subconscious expectation that you're just going to do PT X number of times and it's going to go away.
Yes.
Or you do the certain magical exercise and it's going to go away.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is that, hopefully I'm using this term correctly, analgesic effect, where you do something and there's a big reduction of pain, or it helps with the function of the muscle or the joints or what have you. Obviously, it all depends. So there is a lot of that, but if you have the attitude that if you have this expectation, this outcome expectation that if I just do this, it will be fine, you're
right.
You're probably barking up the wrong tree.
Right. Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to continue to train around pain,
Yeah.
around injury, because
Yeah.
you have the rest of your body to still address and take care of.
Yep.
And oftentimes that's the most important thing that you can do, is to continue to move and strengthen and train the body while giving certain, patterns rest. And
Yep.
a lot of times for relatively minor aches and pains and injuries like that, that's in the experiences that I've seen, that's like the best thing that you can do. The body is pretty resilient, especially when you are consistently strength training, don't sell yourself short. We have very resilient bodies. So all that said, that was kind of our first
Yeah.
toe in the water, breaking the ice. Oh no, a training injury. And then we had something a little bit more serious happen.
Yep.
So
Yep.
tell us about that.
Yeah. So then it was probably about a year after all of this. So again, after my first powerlifting meet, then I was like, I love this. This is what I want to do. And so my training became very focused around like one meet to the next. And at that point, I was doing about meets, 3 to 4 meets a year. And so I had already done, at that point, I had done 3 meets. So I was getting ready for my fourth meet. And this was in January. I was like, my next meet, it was going to be Battle on the Border again, which was it was going to be a year after my first meet. I was getting ready for that. I was so excited for that. And I was deadlifting. And at that time, I started off sumo deadlifting just because that's where I felt comfortable. And so I had been doing, sumo deadlifts. So I was in the gym in my training session. And I remember this so vividly because I was so excited because it was my first time I had like 4 sets of 8 at 225 pounds. And I was so excited because I'd never done, 8 before. And I had 4 sets of this. And I did my first set. It felt great. They moved way better than I expected them to. Did my second, did my third. And then I get to my fourth set, still felt great. I'm on my last rep of the last set. And as I'm pulling, I just feel a pop in my hamstring. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure what happened there. And so I put the weights away and I could feel some pain, but it wasn't like excruciating at the time. I wasn't really sure, what it was, but I messaged Zach and I'm like, I felt a pop. And I still remember his reply. All he said was, pop means you're done. Basically stop training, and I
Yeah.
was like, it meant stop training, go home. But because it wasn't that bad, I was thinking, well, maybe I can go over and I had good mornings or something. Maybe I can go over and just do some of those. So I put the bar on my back and I'm like going to continue my training. And as soon as I start to hinge, I was like, ow, okay, yeah. And then I just started crying and I was upset because I had a meet. I was, less than, I guess, 2.5 months out from a meet. It was the first week of January. I was, right at the beginning of the year. So I was devastated. So I go home, I ice it, and of course I'm like Googling, just like everybody else, I'm Googling everything under the sun. Well, it did not, I don't think my hamstring actually tore. I didn't have any kind of bruising or, blood or, anything on any kind of discoloration, but it hurt. And I mean, it hurt to walk. And so I rested, I iced it, I rested, took, anti-inflammatories. And that was, mentally, it was very, very hard because it was, even though, again, it wasn't it wasn't significantly affecting my day to day. I mean, I could feel it. It bothered me when I walked, but I knew I had a meet. I couldn't squat. I couldn't deadlift. And I did continue benching. I tried doing kettlebell swings. Clearly, that was an absolute no. And so I would just start it. I think this was kind of the beginning of when I really had to mentally work through something and work around, because I was determined to keep doing my training. But at the same time, I don't know if I would say being smart, because now I look at things a lot different, because I would have trained in any way that I could have. But when you have a hamstring injury, the pain was, so bad with certain movements that I really just had to find what I could do without like this sharp pain, from the hinging movements. So I would say probably for the first couple weeks, I was doing, very, very light. I found like some rehab protocols and they actually felt pretty good. So I would do very, very light, like higher repetition stuff, some bands, mobility, and then my bench and upper body, I could still do the same. So I was training upper body normal. My, bench upper body was normal. And lower body, I was just trying to do things that didn't seem to aggravate it very much. Goblet squats, there were still plenty of things I could do at the time. And I what I found was probably, I think it was, I laid off deadlifts completely for about a month, and then I wanted to try them again, and sumo was just not going to happen. I could feel the pressure, and what I did not want was to risk injuring it worse than it already was. And so I tried conventional. I was just going to do some light conventional deadlifts, and I thought, wow, okay, this really doesn't hurt that much. There was a little bit of pressure, and of course I felt it because my hamstring was still in the healing process. But I thought, well, if this stance is what's going to allow me to deadlift, then I will try it, see how it goes. So I started to deadlift, and I had never at that point, I think my max sumo deadlift was like around 315 pounds at that time. And my max conventional, I don't think I had ever done a conventional deadlift over about like 250 pounds or something around there. I just never, really trained it because at that point, I felt stronger with sumo. So we started to, I told Zach, I said, hey, I think I can deadlift conventional. It doesn't seem to hurt. Let's try that and see how it goes. So we worked up very slowly, but slowly, but not too slowly because I did have a meet coming up. But we worked up just to see how conventional would feel. And I started to squat. Squats were okay. I was a little hesitant at first, but the squats actually felt, they healed up, once my hamstring started to heal up after a few weeks, squats actually felt better. So I went into that meet. We trained conventional all the way up to it. And I went into that meet and ended up, I hit like a 325 pound. That was a meet PR. That was a lifetime PR, and it was conventional. So I thought at that point, oh, I kind of like this. And so I have lifted conventional ever since then. And the main reason I did, people have asked me, well, why'd you switch from sumo? Well, because that was the only way I could lift, at the time after pulling my hamstring. But for the first, I'd say, gosh, several years through that, I would attempt to go back just to do sumo for just an accessory or just to see how it feel. And even though I didn't have pain, I had that like pressure. So I just felt like conventional was safer for me. And I felt very strong with conventional. I liked, how it felt, and it just wasn't worth the risk at that point. So yeah, so that was the first time that I actually had to, even though again, it wasn't like a catastrophic, significant injury that was affecting my day to day, it was something that was significant enough that I had to really change how I was lifting. And that was really good because it was kind of the start, just from a mental way of looking at things. That was my first turning point. And again, I was still a fairly new lifter, to all of this, even though at the time I may not have thought that. And I was still figuring out kind of how all this worked and how you work around things. But I think it helped me for the future things that I kind of ran into. And again, it kind of sounds like, oh, I've just been injured all the time, and I really have not. But there's, I think it's the nature of the beast when you're training. I train pretty hard. I train, I don't miss any training sessions. I'm training constantly. And just the nature of the beast is, there's, whether it's overtraining or a freak accident or just something that happens, out of the blue, no matter how much you focus on form and tension and everything, something still can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, just that I almost look at it like a pinball game. Like you're going, bam, something knocks into you, and suddenly like you're going over here. But
Yeah,
it also goes to show that even in a relatively constrained training methodology like powerlifting, like you're really just focusing on like the big three lifts, it just goes to show like how much variability and options you really do have if you're willing to just
yes,
try and experiment. And like the global options there for deadlift from a competition standpoint is you have conventional and sumo. But even within those two big categories, there's lots of room for technique experimentation. And
yep,
another big thing, not to deviate from the deadlift, but like in your squat, over the course of time, your squat stance has gotten narrow,
narrow,
it's gone out, it's gone narrow, but
yep,
but it's like again, like you posted your 2015 sumo deadlift compared to your, now that you've gotten a little bit back into sumo deadlifting, like your pause sumo deadlift from, like last week's training, and they're both textbook technique deadlifts. But the difference is the years of just nuanced training and practice around how you approach the bar, your technique. I'm sure, probably mentally and emotionally, there's different things going on in there. So yeah, it also just goes to show that like there's just no accounting for the years and the thousands of repetitions that accumulate to make the athlete. So not to deviate too far from the whole like injury conversation, but when somebody's starting off, we see things in black and white. This is good, this is bad, this is for me, this is not for me.
yep,
I do sumo versus I do conventional, or I do wide, powerlifting stance squat versus, narrow bodybuilding stance squat, or I do super wide bench versus more narrow bench, all this stuff. And it's good to kind of know your lane and what maybe your body naturally is strongest at, but we cannot overlook the macro lifting skills that can then be, sliced and diced in various different ways over the course of a training career that you never know when it might really need to come in handy. And when we're kind of forced to change, as is the case, with an injury, you'll be happy that you have, like in your case, you had such a great hip hinge strength skill that doing sumo versus doing conventional, I wasn't surprised that you could PR in a different stance. So that's one thing that I kind of want to impart, especially on the new lifter, is don't get too caught up in the the specifics of the lift. I mean, certainly be a technician when it comes to technique and all that other stuff, but also understand that there's lots of room for interpretation. And I, kind of coaching you through that big change from sumo to conventional really helped to solidify in my mind there is a skill to just picking heavy weights up off the ground, no matter how you do it. There is a hip hinge strength component to all of that as well. And those those skills and those strength techniques go deeper than just the kind of the more superficial sumo versus conventional conversation. And that's something that I think is important to always kind of keep in mind in your own training. And that's kind of why, for years now, I've had a lot of lifters train both, not training to their max necessarily, but feeling out the strength of all sorts of different variations of the main lifts. Because again, I mean, you're building a more robust, skill set, and you never know when you might have to be forced to use a different technique.
Yeah, and the same goes, again, for all the lifts. And I do try, there's a couple different things that I think are important with changing your stance, your grip. I'll change, I'll do close grip bench, I'll do wide grip bench, and with squats, I'll do, narrow stance. And I will always have what I feel the strongest with for a competition, but I do like training all of them. I also think it's good to train different specific, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. Specificity is very important when I'm close or leading into a meet. But I think that doing the same thing year round, without any, if I just did, the same technique, the same stance, the same, moves year round, I'm also kind of, well, one, mentally, I start getting tired of doing that. But two, I feel like part of my recovery is giving my body a chance to do, some different moves and different things. Just like, after meet, I really like to do a lot more kettlebell stuff. I like to do, kettlebell training, body weight training, which I always do, but it gets a little bit, less when it's getting close to a meet. I also I love accessories. And so after meet is a perfect time, like right now, the past month or so, doing a whole lot, different, trying things out, seeing what feels good. Because just because, one stance or one method of doing a lift has felt good, for however many years, doesn't mean that I'm not going to switch it up and suddenly find that, wow, that's actually a stronger way to do that, or I feel really good to do that. So, I try to really keep an open mind. Whereas, when I did first start training, I was very, I'd find how I felt my strongest, and I was very much wanting to, cut and dry. Kind of, also when I looked at programming, I felt like I needed to be doing certain things. But, over the years as well, the hamstring injury happened. And then, throughout, again, I've been doing the powerlifting part for almost 7 years now. So over those years, I've had, I had the hamstring injury, I've had shoulder issues where, again, nothing horrible, but like some tendonitis, maybe a little bit of shoulder impingement. And, just various things that have cropped up. And through that, as I've trained and worked through all of that, I've become more and more open with realizing just how many things that I can do to work around that. So, and recently, as we know, the most recent, and I, it's ironic because right now I'm actually training sumo because I have an issue that conventional was bothering me. But when I made the move from a big move. Well, first of all, I made a big move from Argentina to the US right during the pandemic. And then I moved to from Charlotte to Savannah in October. And during all the move, it just was stressful. My recovery was not real great. I was still continuing training. The move was taxing and exhausting. And through all of that, I started feeling this, glute or IT band, something, that was just nagging. Now, sure enough, I thought, it'll go away in a week or so. Well, it didn't. And I was in meet prep at that time. I was preparing for a meet. Either I was going to do one in November, or I was going to do one in December. Ended up deciding that November wasn't the right time because this was, kind of really bothering me. And as it got close to December, the December meet, it was still bothering me. And so I kind of trained through it, but I was very careful. We didn't go near as heavy in preparing for this meet as I typically would. Continued my training, and we just really, really gauged. Because what I did not want to do was hurt it, make it significantly worse to where I would not be able to compete. Because it was really important for me to do that meet. So we just determined what bothered it and did that minimally. So we didn't do anything really high rep. We didn't, get up to the higher percentages like I normally would. And I did the meet, and it was, I did feel we didn't even at the meet, we didn't go as high as, I typically would have, but yet it was a great meet. And then immediately after the meet, we transitioned and took out anything that caused any pain at all. So back squats were kind of bugging me at the time. Conventional deadlift was really bugging it. And so we took those out completely. And that's been about 7 weeks now. And we're just starting to introduce some, just safety bar squats, lightweight, higher reps, feel no pain with it at all, which is great. And I've been doing sumo deadlifts, one just for fun to be able to still deadlift. Again, it isn't very heavy what I'm doing right now, but I still can deadlift. So I'm still deadlifting. I was doing lots of squats with kettlebells. We had fun, we've had fun over the last, month, 6 weeks or whatever, coming up with different exercises. But I think throughout all of, these years, I kind of come full circle, is that I realize that the movement in general is very good for it. So I think, if I had just stopped and, sat on the couch or whatever, that's not going to necessarily make it, better. The whole reason that you go to physical therapy is, I think, one, physical therapy, they know what you should be doing. But I also think that a lot of people won't do that at home. If they're not regularly training, they're not getting that movement. And I think having somebody come in for 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, whatever, they're doing for physical therapy, is a way to get them there to do it, to train it. Because a lot of people are not going to do, that at home if they're not already, training or doing that. So for me, by doing things that do not cause pain, I'm getting the movement, and I don't let it bother me. I just kind of move on. I know that eventually it will go away, and I work around it, and and it's not mentally catastrophic anymore either. It's like, I know that this is going to come and go. I can continue my training. It just, may need to look a little bit different. And it's ultimately just it's ended up being, I think, going through that process over all the years and knowing that it does always get better. Some of them take a little longer than you want it to be. But I think everything ultimately, gets better. You work around it, and you're able to continue your training. So
Yeah, and you've always been really good about taking the long-term training approach, being patient.
yep.
I would like to. I'm not going to take any credit for that, but I think some of the first kind of hardest coaching conversations we had when we started training revolved around give it 3 years.
Yeah.
That was kind of my default answer for a lot of stuff there for a while. And sure enough, 4 years down the line,
Yep. Yeah.
it's
Yeah, and
no
that was
problem.
always the most, at the time, it's always very frustrating to hear that, because I think you think, just kind of like you said with the PT, you think that there's this magic, pill you're going to take, or you're going to go to a doctor and they're just going to make you magically in 6 weeks you're going to be better, because that's like the normal time frame that you would hear, 6 weeks and it'll be better. And so I think, okay, so 6 weeks is here, then I'll be 100% by then. And I think just going into it, knowing that, it's going to take time. It could take 2 weeks. It could take, 6 months. And some things just do take longer. I remember, saying when I was going through the hamstring, thing at that time, I just thought, I just want to have a training session where I don't feel any pain at all. And, it had been like a week or 2 weeks or something like that, and so it seems very, when you're the one going through it, it does seem very traumatic at the time. But I think once you've kind of gone through it and you realize that everything, I mean, obviously there are, if somebody is hurt catastrophically or something like that, that's a different, I'm just talking normal overtraining or minor injuries that occur during, that seem to take forever to heal. But in reality, it's not affecting my day-to-day, it's affecting my training. And if I'm patient and don't try to test it or see if it's better, same thing, I believe me, there's been days where I'm like, I just want to load up the bar. I have a gym in my house now, like I want to load up the bar and go out and back squat and see if it hurts. But I'm like, no, the plan was that I was going to wait, 6+ weeks and do anything where I just don't feel it at all. And then eventually it's fine. And so patience is not my best virtue, but if there's anything I've learned through all of this, it's being patient. And now with the people who, even the people who I'm coaching, have run into, minor issues and things like that. And we just work around it. The best advice I can give is what I do myself now. Again, not a medical expert, I just tell people it sounds like common sense, but it's not, it's not always what we do. But if you feel pain, you kind of learn and when it's okay, because there may be some discomfort, and that's okay to to continue to train through. But really, it's, if there's an exercise that's causing pain, and especially if it's getting worse, stop. Just don't do it, because it is not gonna start magically getting better by doing that. So I think that I have saved myself a ton of, I've probably reduced the time in some of these things that nag. Sometimes I'll have a shoulder thing where it'll start nagging and I lay off it right away. And a week or so later, it's fine because I did that. Whereas if I had just continued to push and push and push, then it may get worse. So I think that by knowing, what you can do when and knowing that there are always moves that you can do, that and continue your training. And I think we've been very creative with coming up with tons of different exercises, and it's not like I ever run out of things to train. And we're working around, even though I'm not doing the main lifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a long game. If you're serious about training, if you're serious about realizing your potential, buckle in for the years. We're not even talking about months here. So if the thought of 6 weeks without squatting, if that freaks you out, again, we get it, because it's all relative. But also understand that a lot of the anguish is more mental than it is physical. Yeah. And that's not to downplay it, because that is very serious. And then you get into training motivation and mood and possible depression. These are serious things. But do give yourself the grace, and do understand that life is long in a lot of respects, and patience it sucks. It sounds a little patronizing. I get it. But, if you're in it for the long haul, 6 weeks, 6 months goes by like that.
Yeah.
And when you approach your training in, a smart and sane way, there's always things that will keep you engaged and things that will keep you progressing. And that's what this whole thing is all about. So
Yeah.
I am curious, Tracy. Like you said, we have gotten really creative over the years. We've gotten into lots of fun and funky exercises, different programming schemes and methodologies and such. But one thing that over the years um, you have really adopted is a robust mobility warm up
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
And you can speak to it certainly better than I can, but we're talking about all these injuries. But again, like you said, we're talking about 7, going on 8 years of training. There's really
Yeah.
just only been a relatively few serious hiccups. And when you
Yeah.
consider just how much you train and how seriously you train, that's really saying something. So share with us like what your evolution over the years when it comes to the warm up, when it comes to mobility, when it comes to um, how you get prepared for a training session, and if there are like
Yeah.
maybe specific exercises that you like and that you want to share,
Yeah.
that maybe people can dig into. Uh, it's all really cool to hear the maybe not so quote unquote Instagram worthy things that lifters are up to before we see like the big lifts.
Yeah. And it's funny because I get so much grief from people about how much time I spend on mobility and warming up. And, I know that there's different courts. Some courts say, oh, you don't really need to do warm up or mobility. And there's other sides that think you need to do a lot. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think it's what works for you. And you really have to find where feel the most comfortable. I'm older, I'm 50. I know that. I like to train a lot. I like a lot of volume. I like to lift a lot. Zach knows that. We adapt. But because of that, it's really important for me to focus on recovery and mobility. I also work at a desk all day long. So I'm sitting at a desk at a keyboard, and so it's not even just I have my mobility and warm ups that I'll mention, in training, but it's also making a point of incorporating mobility and movement throughout the day. Because again, if I have a real big, deadlift session and then the next day I'm sitting at my desk working all day, I just feel really stiff and horrible. So I work from home, where I think a lot of people do right now just because of the pandemic. But I think it's, making time throughout the day to get up and just, do some marches, do some rocks, do, some things that feel good, arm circles and things like that. So for my training, I have found over the years, I love to try new mobility, moves and different things. Um, but I have several that stick. I'm always willing to try new things, and of course, anybody who follows Zach knows that Zach has a million ideas mobility. And so, what I like is that he will incorporate different ones into some of the beginning of my training sessions, and the ones that I find every now and then I'll say that's a keeper. That's going on the like permanent list. So I find the ones, I'm willing to try. Some moves I can do, and yeah, I mean, they're okay. But some I can just really tell that by the way I feel it, I can just know that this is a good move for me. So I usually spend not a significant amount of time, maybe, 20 minutes or so before every training session. I'll do some rocks. I'll do some planks, some bird dogs. I'll do, there's one, which, Zach, you'll have to, it's hard to describe that one. He calls it the iron lizard, but it's like a hip adductor type. That was like one that he added to one of my programs years ago. And I just felt that this is good for my, before squatting. And now I realize that, even on bench days, I need something to kind of open up, my hips, get everything for the leg drive. So that's been a keeper. I'll do, arm circles just to kind of get the motion, different. So I'll have both upper body and lower body moves that I do, kind of some of the same ones almost every time. And then depending on what I'm training that day, whether it's squats and deadlifts or bench, I'll add in some like kettlebell arm bars. If it's like an upper body day, we'll add in some scap pull-ups just so I can, because that'll help kind of, activate everything that needs to be ready for bench. And like recently we found that, he added it on my program. On bench day, I'll do the dumbbell flies, just light, like I have 20 pounds, lay on the bench, do it, but it really opens up and stretches my pecs and gets it ready for bench. And I told him after the first couple weeks of doing that, I said, I think these need to stay because they feel really good. Like my bench I felt like, I warmed up whatever I needed to warm up before that. And I could just feel it in my bench. So we added that. So I would do about 20 minutes or so of moves like that. And then when I'm actually warming up the main lift, especially if I'm going into if it's leading into a meet and I'm going to be doing heavier training with squat, bench, or deadlift, I kind of adjust warm-ups now. Like I used to love to do a million warm-ups, and that was great and that felt good. But then I would get to a meet that is much more fast-paced, especially nationals. And I was so accustomed to doing these million warm-ups and having all this time that it would kind of throw me for a loop at the meet. So when I am, depending on what kind of meet I'm doing, I try to keep those structured to my warm-up structured to what I'm going to actually do meet day. Whether it feels good or not, I have a limited amount of time, but my mobility work that I do before, I can start that whenever I want. So I always make sure I get that in. The other thing that I do, that Zach's real good about, and we both kind of like having, is we'll incorporate mobility even with sets. So we superset a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's just, two hard exercises together just to really, work a specific part, my quads or whatever we're focusing on. But really, we try to incorporate different moves that will kind of correlate. For example, like with bench, we'll do some kind of pulling movement. It might be, face pulls or something with bands that feels good. It'll still tire me out, but it's good mobility and core work. So I think during my training, we always have a whole lot of, if somebody looks at my program, they're going to, see lines and lines of stuff, but there's a whole lot of mobility work and correctives and things, that I'm working on. Right now I'm working on some single leg stuff again. I've noticed we'll find things that I wouldn't say necessarily weaknesses, but weaknesses or things that we know we need to work on to make my lift stronger, and we'll incorporate that. So we're doing a lot of single leg deadlifts, things, such as that. And that all correlates and helps with injury prevention. So I think we are always trying to focus on one, including mobility, but there's always a purpose. We don't just randomly I don't go and just say, I'm just going to do all this stuff for the sake of doing it. Every single exercise that I do is for a purpose. And if I don't feel like that it's beneficial, or I don't feel what I think I should be feeling with it, we scratch it very quickly. We'll scratch it and move on and find, something else and put it in its place. So I think that's been something that helps with injury prevention, and again, looking for the long haul as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Injecting appropriate variety and novelty into your programming is key. Because again, you never know what little thing is going to click for you at a certain particular point in time. Could be a
Yeah.
very, very, left field kind of weird exercise. Could be something very, very simple. Like, like the dumbbell flies, I'm confident that we did dumbbell flies back in the day, and it was just like,
Yeah.
whatever. It probably,
No, I'm sure.
it probably bothered your shoulder. It
Exactly.
probably, for whatever reason, it just was like not a good idea to do.
Yep.
Flies are not, they're not the simplest thing to like really get down. But 7 years later, you're a fundamentally different athlete with a different body, with different, strengths and areas for improvement. And suddenly we revisit something as simple as the dumbbell fly, and it fills this little gap, or it helps you tune in to a certain mind muscle connection or pattern that just fits. So this mobility stuff, these accessories, these really all go into filling movement gaps.
Yeah.
and really just helping you build a robust set of physical skills. And most of it still comes back to strength, because I mean, a lot of these mobility drills are really strength exercises
Yeah.
in just a limited range of motion, or in some other way has like a constraint, because strength isn't just a big barbell in your hands. So really, as we know from a lot of the mobility nerds, mobility is strength in deeper ranges of motion.
Yeah.
So kind of keeping that in mind is key. And so in that respect, a mobility exercise doesn't need to look like a traditional flexibility stretch exercise. It can come in lots of different forms. So continuing to inject these experiments into your training is key, like no matter who you are.
Yeah.
So if you can't remember the last time you tried a new exercise, then it's time to try a new exercise. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It could literally just be, you know, moving your stance, moving joint position. You know, oftentimes I find that like the best things are just, taking a particular pattern, taking a particular lift, and just putting just a new little constraint on it, and that just comes with experimentation. And over the years and over the hundreds of exercises that you try, you will develop an intuition. You develop a very strong intuition with what your body needs and what it might respond best to. And again, that's just something that comes over the course of years and years and years.
Yeah.
And from the coaching standpoint, the same thing applies. Like, it's only after working together for someone over the long term, over many, many cycles of training, through challenges, through injuries, through PRs, only then do you really start to develop an intuition of what might this person need at this particular point in time. What's the puzzle piece that maybe we can fit in here? And again, from the coaching side, this is why it always pays to experiment in your own training to see how it could kind of translate for your clientele, and to continually expose yourself to different training methodologies, exercises, tools, things like that. And even like resistance band stuff. Like back in the day, like I never used a resistance band, but training more and more people in home, and now with more people training at home, I've really, become a bit of a devotee to resistance band training, mini band training, because I took the time to kind of figure out the nuances of how it works for me and how it can work for certain athletes. Um, so yeah, and mobility and warm up doesn't just need to sit in its own box before
Right.
you're actually training. It can and probably should be mixed into the whole bag,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. And
again, your
then
body doesn't know the difference between warm up and training.
yeah. And then also prioritizing, like when I lived in Buenos Aires, when I lived in Argentina, I walked, 30 minutes, 45 minutes to and from the gym. And that was great. So I could adapt. Again, if you're walking to get to where you are, then you probably don't need as much warm up, for all the other stuff. I considered that part of my warm up. And then it was great when I walked home because, I had just lifted and now I'm getting more movement. But the less movement that I guess you get on a regular, like throughout your day, is then you need to take into account. Like I'm here, I work from home now, I have my gym, in the garage. I don't leave a lot. I'm trying to make a point to walk more, but on days that it's just really flipping cold, it's kind of hard for me to want to, cold and rainy, hard for me to get outside. So I'll try to do, maybe a little more mobility. I might get on the rower. We now have incorporated some jump rope, just some things that I feel like, the more tools that I have, the more different things that I try, just the better that I feel overall. Plus, it's just good in general. But both for injury rehabbing as well, for like going through the glute injury that I've recently been dealing with, and preventing anything else, I feel like it makes a tremendous difference. So, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's over the years, I think, just trying different things and finding. People will ask me, what do you do for your warm-ups? And I'll tell people, I'll give my list of like, I'll show people, without any problem. I should probably make a little video on it. But again, what works for me is, these are the moves that I feel and that I have found work. And I'll see somebody, the one thing I do love Instagram for is I get so many ideas and I'll be like, I'll send you, I'll send Zach, hey, doesn't this look kind of cool? I should try this. And I'll try it. And sometimes, I'll try it once or twice and just know, yeah, no, probably not something I'm going to keep in my little, toolbox of things I'm going to do. Or I'll do something and I'm like, this is great. I just told him last week, I said, I saw somebody doing these bird dog rows where they had a kettlebell and they were on a bench, and it was very good core exercise. And we incorporated it into my current program and I did them and I was like, yep, these are great. These I feel so, it's keeping, I'm having to focus on staying tight or it'll pull me over. It feels great on my arms to be doing this row. So I think you'll just, when you do a move, whether it's something that's benefiting you, if it feels really awkward or it doesn't feel good, or you feel any kind of tightness, or it's not worth doing. Move on. I mean, it's mobility, it's an accessory. Find the ones that feel the best for your body and incorporate them, and just make a point of doing them.
Hmm. Yeah, and let that be a lesson to all the athletes and trainees out there. I've said this in different ways over the course of time, but when you step into the gym, don't turn your brain off. I think a lot of times the mentality is we're hitting the weight room and it's, playlist is on, headphones are on, and emotions and critical thought is out the window, and we're just here to smash weights. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. But more often than not, you need to be looking at your training as a mindful practice. Like you should learn a little something with every workout. So, again, bodily intuition comes with practice, and it comes with trying lots of different things, so that over the course of years, you got someone like Tracy who can pick something out, and pretty much within a couple reps, she knows how this is filling a gap or maybe why it's not necessary. So
Yeah,
all of that is important.
on that same line, going back to when I got my hamstring injury, when I look at like what I know now as compared to then, on that, and I think I remember telling you this too. It's been a long time, but I still remember this. I remember on that last set, I mean, I was tired, but I was so excited to be doing this. On It was 8 reps, and like on the 6th rep, I started to feel like this tightness in my hamstring, and it just felt off. Like it felt a little weird, but I had 2 more reps left. And or maybe it was at the beginning of the set. Again, it was so many years ago, I don't remember. But regardless, it did feel like something was tight or pulling or whatever. And I finished the set. I just continued on. And then on that 8th rep, pop. Well, now if I feel anything that feels out of whack, I stop. And, I might rest or do, some band work, or let's say I was, benching if something feels off. Um, when I go back, if I still feel, start the setup and it just feels off, I just call it a day on that particular movement, and do other things that don't feel weird. And I think that a lot of that is from the years of doing this. And I think that has probably saved me from a ton of, different types of who knows what kind of, injuries, whether it's in my back or anything like that. If something just doesn't feel right that day, and it could be because, on days that if your recovery is not great, if you're tired, if you've been working a lot, whatever, there's a million different reasons that you can have an off day. It's just listening and responding to that, instead of, like Zach was saying, instead of just going in. And I used to, when I first started, for the first couple of years, I'd have my list of my training with the weights and all that. And I don't care, I'm checking those boxes. I am checking every one of those boxes. And now I am a whole lot more adaptable, to where I really, really adjust based on how I feel. And again, it's not, oh, I'm tired, I don't feel like doing these 30 reps that Zach put on here today. Not that kind, but it's, I'm doing something and it just feels, off, or I feel like I just know intuitively, I know because of the years of training. And that's where coach helps, with that, having that, especially for somebody who's newer, to know, to really make sure that that person understands, just because it's written on paper doesn't mean that it has to be done.
Yes, it's true. I'm not Moses. I'm not writing your program down on stone tablets. These are not commandments. This is not gospel. These are suggestions. As a coach, I'm suggesting that you do these exercises, but hey, at the end of the day, use discretion, use your judgment. A couple reps, shaved off the top, no problem. No problem. Okay. So Tracy, I think this is a good place to wrap up here. I think we've covered a lot of ground. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you being kind of forthcoming and willing to have this conversation, because you are a stellar standout strength athlete that so many people look up to. You're an example for so many. And I can see how your image, so to speak, can be something that you want to preserve. And maybe like, hey, I don't want to scare anybody from weightlifting. That's the last thing that we want to do here, is scare anybody away from hard, serious training. But what we also want to do is let you in on the fact that everybody goes through it. It's normal, it's common. Now, that's not to say that it's something that you should expect necessarily, or something that you should just like throw your hands up and say that it's all for naught or that it's not for you. But what we do want to do is normalize the conversation and say, like, it really does happen to everybody. And even if you don't train, like, come on, like, sitting down at a desk for 8 hours can be just as detrimental to your back as throwing it out on a heavy deadlift.
Yeah.
So this is kind of just part of the hard conversation of, this is the rent we got to pay for living on this planet. This is the rent that we got to pay for having, human bodies. But the flip side to that is the human body is so resilient, and you can get over and get through more than you probably think. Again, going back to Tracy's like original point, it's all relative. And you don't know what your body is capable of until you've gone through it. So, for both sides of the spectrum, if you're someone who's new, who's just starting out, don't get freaked out. These aches and pains will probably come, and they will probably go, and you will probably look back at whatever point in time in your lifting career and say, you know what, it was totally worth it. The strength that I've gotten, the muscle that I've gotten, the abilities that I've gotten, the growth that comes not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Training gives us so much. I think Tracy could expound on that more than anybody. Training gives us so much, and all it requires from us is patience, hard work, mindfulness, and no, hey, listen, nobody gets out of this thing alive. You're gonna come out with maybe some bumps and bruises, but it's oftentimes more mental than it is physical. So let that be, let that be a little salve for you. And then, hey, for you more experienced lifters, for you kind of hardcore trainees, hey, the deal. The deal. This is not something to. Hey, everything is your own business. Whatever you want to share, whatever you don't want to share, is fine. But just also know that if you are, struggling with an injury, you're struggling with pain, always, again, don't want to sound too patronizing, but keep an open mind, stay optimistic. And again, the body is so resilient. There's so many things that you can do. So be patient, but if you're feeling like you're running into a brick wall, there's always different options to explore. And at the end, it's all worth it. All the effort is worth it. So again, Tracy, I just want to give you kudos for being willing to have this conversation, because it can be a dirty little secret. We see all these people on Instagram, we see all these people on social media, and the fact is that anybody that you see in the athletic world, period, has had to overcome all sorts of physical challenges, whether that's powerlifters, whether that's Olympic lifters, CrossFitters, football, basketball, baseball, any sport, anyone who is really going for it, anybody who gets anywhere close to their physical potential has had to overcome some real setback and some real challenges. And oftentimes that comes, that comes in the way of overtraining or injury or things like that. But it's not a death sentence. It's not a sentence that is cutting you off from training completely. But as I think Stu McGill and Brian, I forget his name, literally wrote the book. Shaw, they wrote the book, The Gift of Injury.
Yep.
And it really, injury and setback really can be a gift, because it can then push you into new areas of progress that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. And that just comes with time, and it comes with mindful attention, and it comes with having a positive attitude. So that's really all I have to share on that front. Tracy, is there anything that you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, no, I was going to say someone asked me, someone I was talking to had messaged me and they were going through kind of an injury in their training and they were really frustrated. And they said, I, why is this happening to me? It seems like, I see all these high level lifters and none of them get hurt. And I said, well, if you were just looking at my Instagram over the last leading up to that meet, would you have known that I was working through an injury? She was like, well, no. So, my point is, and the reason I don't post it is because I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just trying to, for myself, focus on what I can do rather than what I can. And I think that's the case for a lot of people is it's not like we're trying to hide that we get injured, but why focus, if you just see everybody posting about their injuries that they're going through, then you're focusing on that injury. So if I go into my training and I'm focusing on what I can do, that makes that injury seem a whole lot more minor than if I'm just putting, when I first started those first couple of years with my hamstring and my elbow, everything was revolved around, oh my gosh, do I feel the pain? Whereas nowadays, when something happens, I know that that's there. I'm not ignoring it. I'm working around it and I can do a lot. So I feel like by not focusing on that. So, but at the same time, I also want to be very forthcoming and say, I've been through my share of plenty of things that I've had to work through, little nagging injury wise here and there that have come and gone, and they all go away. And so I think it's just, how you look at it. But I think it's important for everybody to know, especially as a new lifter, to know that it's normal. Again, you don't want to be in pain all the time and you want to do everything you can to work around it. But I think that it is normal, as Zach said, and it's out there and just, so I just wanted to be, I think that it was good, at least approach that I have gone through even recently, and I'm still working through, one particular. So anyway, I
Yeah,
think that was an important thing to share.
absolutely. Well, Tracy, thanks again. And I think
That's
you
it.
summed it
So
up well. I think you summed it up well when you said, focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. And when you focus on what you can do expands. So we'll
correct.
leave it on that. And Tracy, we'll chat again
Yep.
here real soon.
Okay.